Mid-range competition in the smartphone industry is tough and it's not easy for any handset to stand out. This is an even bigger challenge when you are building upon the legacy of one of the most popular value flagships ever. The Poco X3 Pro is a spiritual successor of sorts to the Poco Phone F1, a smartphone that changed the value proposition through its high-end specs at a cutthroat price. However, the landscape has changed quite a bit since the day of the F1, both in terms of market, demographics and price of components. Performance upgrades aside, changes between the standard Poco X3 and the Poco X3 Pro are minimal. There's Gorilla Glass 6 at the front this time around, as well as curious changes in the camera configuration that we'll address below. So is the Poco X3 Pro and its performance focus the way to go in the mid-range segment? Let's see. Design is one of the areas where essentially nothing has changed from the original XF NFC, aside from a new set of colors. That means the same set of problems unfortunately. The X3 Pro is big with a 6.67-inch display. It's bulky at 9.4mm thick and 215 grams. And it's pretty ugly with the enormous Poco logo embezzled across the backside. It's not all bad though. The I-53 rating returns, giving the phone pretty respectable dust and water resistance for a cheap phone even with the headphone jack included. While an upgrade to Gorilla Glass 6 should make the display a bit more durable. The frame is still built out of aluminum with a plastic back, and this is one of the phones where it really does feel plasticky. There are three colors to pick from: Phantom Black, Metal Browns and Frost Blue. The new finishes are welcome, but ultimately the design is still the biggest problem with X3 Pro. It's heavy, it's thick, and thanks to the Poco logo the plastic finish looks both and feels kind of cheap. It's not awful, but there are similarly priced phones from Realme and Oppo that look an awful lot slicker. The screen is a pretty clear strong suit here, so as long as you're happy with the fact that it's 6.67 inch, it is pretty large. This is an LCD panel rather than an OLED with an FHD plus resolution of 2400 by 1080. It supports a 120Hz rate however, and 240 touch response rate, both of which will hold immediate appeal for anyone who games a lot on their phone. Even better, the refresh rate can dynamically switch between 5 speeds from 30Hz up to 120Hz, meaning that when necessary the screen can run a little slower to save the battery. The display is bright and punchy with vibrant colors. You won't get great contrast or color depth that OLED can deliver, but the trade-off to deliver a higher refresh rate at this price is a smart choice that prioritizes pure performance and gaming prowess over the necessities like pro-grade color accuracy. Speaking of, the cameras are the only part of Poco X3 Pro that's a fairly clear downgrade from the X3 NFC. The rear setup is broadly similar but differs in the details. You get 4 lenses, but 2 of them are both 2 megapixel, a macro lens and a depth sensor. The other 2 are a 48 megapixel main camera down from the 64 megapixel and 8 megapixel ultra wide down from 13 megapixel. The main camera isn't bad to be fair. The lower resolution and smaller sensor size are counteracted slightly by an improved focus of 1.8 aperture, and in daylight the results are honestly pretty great. There is no optical image stabilization, so you'll get a touch of handshake, but colors really pop, and a 48 megapixel sensor is still enough to pack in tons of detail. All of this is basically par for the course for cheap phones of course. The X3 Pro doesn't have a versatile camera and performance will drop fast outside of good light. But if you just need a decent point and shoot that'll cover your holiday snaps and Instagram stories, that is good enough. The 5160 mAh battery here is pretty considerable and plays a part in how hefty the overall phone is. Despite that, in actual use, this still offers excellent longevity. With lighter use, I managed to get 2 full days out between charges, and heavier users and gamers should have no problem stretching it out to fill the day. At 33 watt, the USB-C charging isn't the absolute fastest around, but it is still pretty nippy. 15 minutes was enough to top the phone up to 28%, with half an hour netting up me 58%, easily enough for a full day's use of based on my habits at least. There's no wireless charging, but that's really no surprise given the price. The X3 Pro ships with Android 11 running Xiaomi's MIUI 12 skin by default. Xiaomi hasn't promised any specific number of system updates for the phone, but based on the company's track record, it's likely to receive the next 2 Android version updates. There's still a lot of variation between Android skins, and I have to admit that the MIUI remains one of my personal least favorite. The busy colorful UI makes the system setting a chore to navigate, and confusing layout means individual settings options never seem to be where you expect them to be. The bottom line is that this isn't the best Android experience out there, but it's ultimately a matter of taste. It is also running the latest software version and should do for another year or two. The Poco X3 Pro is a phone designed for Android gamers or phone users on a budget, though it might also appeal to those who want to go big on specs in order to future-proof their phone. If pure performance isn't your priority, then you can find phones that are similar, lighter, with better camera performance for around the same price. This is near flagship processing power and one of the cheapest phones on the market, and it's almost ludicrous that Xiaomi has pulled it off.